Were You Ever a Child? By Floyd Dell. Chapter 3. The Teacher. Shall the teacher be abolished? What's that, you say? Oh, but surely not before she has had a hearing. The worst criminal deserves that much consideration. I beg of you to let me speak one moment in her behalf. Ah, thank you, my friends. Sister, you had a tight squeak just then. If it hadn't been for my presence of mind and my habitual coolness in the presence of infuriated mobs, I hate to think what would have happened. And now let me see. What can I say in your behalf? My friends, this unhappy woman, for we shall center our attention on the female of the species, is more sinned against than sinning. Reflect. The status of women in the United States has changed in the last 50 years. Modern industry has almost utterly destroyed the old pioneer home with its partnership marriage. Ambitious young men no longer have an economic need for capable women partners. Women have lost their wanted economic value as potential helpers, and their capacity for motherhood appears to the largest section of young manhood in the aspect of a danger rather than a blessing. Women have, to be sure, acquired a new value in the eyes of a smaller class of economically arrived men as a sign of their arrival. That is, they are desired as advertisements of their husband's economic status. In one sense, the task of demonstrating the extent of a husband's income is easier than the pioneer task of helping take care of a farm and raising a houseful of babies. But after all, such a career does require either natural talent or high degree of training in the graceful habits of conspicuous idleness and honorific extravagance. And whether it is that the vast majority of women spurn such a career as an essentially immoral one, or whether they were not really up to its requirements, or whether the demand was found to be more than met by the hordes of candidates turned out yearly by the boarding schools, whatever the reason, the fact remains that a large number of women began to see the necessity and to conceive the desirability of some career other than marriage. But industrial evolution, which had destroyed their former opportunities, had failed to make any considerable, or at least any decent room for them in the industrial scheme. Most particularly was this true for the young women of the middle class. They were unable to go into the professions or the respectable trades, and unwilling, for excellent reasons, to enter the factories. They were given no opportunity to learn how to do anything. They were, quite against their will, but inevitably condemned to profound ignorance of the most important things in the world, work and love. And so, naturally, they became teachers. The world did not want them, and so they stayed out of the world in that drab, quasi-religious edifice, the school building, and prepared others to go into the world. Good heavens, do you suppose for a minute if this unfortunate woman had known enough about anything in particular to get a respectable job outside that she would have stayed in there to teach everything in general? Do you suppose she wants to be a teacher? Do you suppose she likes pretending to be adept in a dozen difficult subjects at once, inflicting an impossible ideal of order upon the 40 restless children whom her weary, amateur, underpaid efforts at instruction have failed to interest, spending her days in the confronting of an impossible task, and her nights in the correcting of an endless series of written proofs of her failure, and on top of that, being denied most of her human rights. The munition factory girls, at least, had their fling when the day's work was over, but she is expected to be a Vestal. In some places, she can't get married without losing her job. In New York, if she is married, she can't have a baby. No, it is her misfortune, not her fault, that she is what she is. In fact, I think that if we could have managed to keep the war going a little longer, she would have pretty much abolished herself. Abdication is becoming popular, and she, among all the monarchs, is not the least uncomfortable and restricted and hedged in by useless divinity. Her abdication will be as disturbing an event as the Russian Revolution. The Russians were accustomed to their Tsar, but they just had to learn to get along without him, and perhaps a similar lesson is in store for us. You find it a little difficult to imagine what school would be like without teachers? Well, for one thing, it would be more like the rest of the world than it is now, and that we agreed was what we wanted. Where else, indeed, except in school, do you find teachers? The rest of the world manages to get along without them very well. Perhaps it is merely a superstition that they are needed in school. Let us inquire into the matter. What do people in the outside world do when they want to learn something? They go to somebody who knows about it and ask him. They do not go to somebody who is reputed to know about everything, except when they are very young, to their parents, and they speedily become disillusioned about that variety of omniscience. They go to somebody who might reasonably be expected to know about the particular thing they are interested in. When a man buys a motor car, he does not say to himself, "Where can I find somebody who can teach me how to run a motor car and dance the tango and predict the rise on the stock market?" He does not look in the telephone directory under T. He just gets an experienced driver to teach him. And when the driver tells him that this is the self-starter and proceeds to start the car with it, a confidence is established which makes him inclined to believe all he can understand of what he is presently told about the mysterious functions of the carburetor. He does not even inquire if the man has taken vows of celibacy. He just pays attention and asks questions and tries to do the thing himself until he learns. But this case, of course, assumes an interest of the pupil in the subject, a willingness and even a desire to learn about it, a feeling that the matter is of some importance to himself. And come to think of it, these motives are generally present in the learning that goes on in the outside world. It is only in school that the pupil is expected to be unwilling to learn. When you were a child and passed the door of the village blacksmith shop and looked in day after day, you saw the blacksmith heating a piece of iron, red hot in the furnace, or twisting it deftly with his pincers, or dropping it sizzling into a tub of water, or paring a horse's hoofs, or hammering in the silvery nails with swift blows. You admired his skill and stood in awe of his strength. And if he had offered to let you blow the bellows for him and shown you how to twist the red-hot penny, that would have been a proud moment. It would also have been an educational one. But suppose there had been a new shop set up in the town, and when you looked in at the open door, you saw a man at work painting a picture. And suppose a bell rang just then, and the man stopped painting right in the middle of a brush stroke and commenced to read aloud how they brought the good news from Ghent to X. And suppose when he was halfway through, the bell rang again, and he said, "We will go on with that tomorrow," and commenced to chisel the surface of a piece of marble. And then, after a little, somewhat exhaustedly, started in to play the Rock of Ages on a flute, interrupting the tune to order you to stand up straight and not whisper to the little boy beside you. There's no doubt what you would think of him. You would know perfectly well that he was crazy. People don't do things in that way anywhere in the world except in school. And even if he had assured you that painting and poetry, sculpture and music were later in your life going to be matters of the deepest importance and interest, and that you should start in now with a determination of becoming proficient in the arts, it would not have helped much, not very much. It's nonsense that children do not want to learn. Everybody wants to learn, and everybody wants to teach, and the process is going on all the time. All that is necessary is to put a person who knows something, really knows it, within the curiosity range of someone who doesn't know it. The process commences at once and is almost irresistible. In the interest of previous engagements, one has to tear oneself away from all sorts of opportunities to learn things which may never be of the slightest use, but which, nevertheless, are alluring precisely because one does not know them. People talk about children being hard to teach, and in the next breath deplore the facility with which they acquire the vices. That seems strange. It takes as much patience, energy, and faithful application to become proficient in a vice as it does to learn mathematics. Yet consider how much more popular poker is than equations. But did a schoolboy ever drop in on a group of teachers who had sat up all night parsing, say, a sentence in Henry James, or seeing who could draw the best map of the North Atlantic states? And when you come to think of it, it seems extremely improbable that any little boy ever learned to drink beer by seeing somebody take a tablespoonful once a day. I think that if there were no teachers, no hastily and superficially trained vestals who were supposed to know everything, but just ordinary human beings who knew passionately and thoroughly one thing, but you'd be surprised to find what a lot of other knowledge that would incidentally comprise, and who had the patience to show little boys and girls how to do that thing. We might get along without immaculate omniscience pretty well. Of course, we'd have to pay them more, because they could get other jobs out in the larger world. And besides, you couldn't expect to get somebody who knows how to do something for the price you are accustomed to pay those who only know how to teach everything. Nor need the change necessarily be abrupt. It could probably be effected with considerable success by firing all the teachers at the beginning of the summer vacations and engaging their services as human beings for the next year. Many of them would find no difficulty at all in readjusting themselves.